One key element of the qualitative data collection in MIGNEX are the focus groups, and in each of the 25 research areas we'll be doing 4 focus groups. And we're doing 4 focus groups, 2 of which will be with men and 2 of which will be with women. And then one with men, one with women will be with people who have weak migration ties, and one with the men and one with women will be with people who have strong migration ties. Now this is in a way quite a rigid sort of setup, but there's a reason why we've done this, and it is to create sufficient variation but also comparability across the MIGNEX research areas. Then for each of the research areas, of course, what it means to have strong or weak migration ties will vary, and it's really important that you, who know the area, make an assessment of that. If you're not sure before going to the field, make sure to spend the first few days doing key informant interviews so you actually do know, and you can make an informed choice about who you recruit to be part of the focus groups with the weak or strong migration ties. And of course, how you define that is something we'll also record, and that you can justify in the research area interim report. And the composition of the focus groups can reflect the composition in terms of strengths and weaknesses of migration ties in the area entirely. In some cases, it's going to be very, very different from what it is in other research areas. Now, the focus groups are an opportunity to collect data with a group discussion in a very focused manner. And your role as a moderator is to say what's necessary, but not more. If you're speaking all the time, then something isn't going to plan. And a key preparation which is necessary before the focus group is to really know inside out what is supposed to be happening. And there are 4 parts of the focus group guide that we are using. Within each of these, there are several elements that need to come in the right order. And if they do, and when they are explained well, the group will be able to discuss them and relate to them, whatever kind of a group it is. Though, of course, each single focus group, even within the same area, is going to be a different experience. The length is going to vary, and the dynamics and the length of time which is spent on the different items is also going to vary. But it's super important to be very, very clear about what the purpose of the different questions and tasks are and aren't, and how you want to be able to be using the format flexibly within the quite structured format which it is. We have had a lot of discussions about the images that we are using before we ended up with the final formatting and versions of those images. So we have 10 different images which illustrate potential pathways into adulthood, potential pathways of choices of what one might want to do, having completed school, for young people especially. And we use these to foster a discussion about the area, about the possibilities in the area, about the assessments which people have about the possibilities which this area offers or does not offer, as compared to other nearby or far away places. And it's important to use those cards in relation to that bigger picture. It's also perhaps useful to consider actually saying that these cards with these images will be used across the 25 areas that span the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa and Asian contexts. So clearly they're not going to seem equally naturally fitting in each of those areas. However, the different types of lines of work are still ones that should be relatively easy to fathom for people across the research areas, even if it's not something which is typical of their own area. So rather than being afraid that they will be experienced as alienating, it's better to meet that challenge up front, as it were, and to help people gain an ownership of these cards and to use them in a constructive way in the discussion. In many of the group discussions, it's likely that that exercise is going to take quite a lot of time. It is important that we manage to get a discussion also going on the point about migration specifically, and in particular in those discussions where migration has not been a central theme in the card exercise. It is also very important that we manage to actually spend some time on both part 1 and part 4 as well. Part 1 because it's an icebreaker part, but also because it helps set the stage for how people are relating to their research area, and also, importantly, to their thoughts about the future and the future here in this specific research area, which we really would like to know and would like to have as a basis before we move into the section with the cards. The final section is important, especially because this is at the point where a lot of exchanges have happened, and there's a lot of reflection going on about how participants see their own assessments of the area and of options for the future, but also how they might react to others. And they might start reconsidering also their own positions, perhaps in light of what other people have shared during the discussion. So it really is quite valuable to have some time also for this last section, whenever that is possible. Of course, there are a lot of research ethical dynamics that need to be considered, specifically in terms of the roles of different participants. There are class issues, there are issues of education, there are other issues that are specific to the local contexts and that need to be managed in a sensitive way. And there's also the issue of the positionality of the researchers in relation to the participants as well that needs to be managed well. In a more formal sense, there is of course also a need to have the informed consent of participants. Now this is important to think about really early on, and ideally informed consent should be given at the point at which participants are recruited, so that in the moment when you're receiving participants to start up the focus group, you won't have any surprises with half the group pulling out because they didn't actually want to participate on the terms that we are actually using, for instance, the recording. So it's important to make sure that the recruitment process is done in such a way that both voluntary informed consent can be ensured. That's given orally, it's recorded by the researchers, not by the participants. But also that participants understand that the focus groups will be recorded and transcribed, although we will not be using any directly identifiable personal data at all. Finally, it's important to also plan for what happens after. So it's important to plan for the transcription and to be sure that you know who is going to be doing it and when will they be doing it, and who is in charge of the recording and making sure there's perhaps a backup recording going on as well, and who is making sure to store that and to name the files correctly straight after the focus groups so they don't get mixed up or lost in any kind of way. It's also important to plan in terms of when the transcriptions can be quality assured, perhaps the translation issues as well that have to be taken into account, and in order for those to be submitted to the MIGNEX project as well, which has to happen then in a timely manner after the fieldwork is completed. So usually that would be something like 6 weeks, but it's possible to find solutions when that's necessary if different research areas are happening back to back, for instance. But ideally it should happen sooner rather than later, and perhaps 2 weeks is a better time frame to work with really, because it is much easier both to transcribe and to quality assure transcriptions when things are fresh in mind. And with so many data being collected, and also with the 4 different focus groups happening, it's quite easy to be overwhelmed and to also get confused about details on what happened exactly in which group, which is not very helpful in terms of quality assurance. So it's a good idea to try and rather do this faster than slower, but certainly to have a plan for who and when will be doing the transcriptions well in advance of the actual focus group happening in the field.